What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be going over what I think are the best sniper support weapons in Warzone right now. So I'll go through all the different options I think there are and what I think each one excels at, and finally give you like an overall verdict on which ones I think are the best and how to build them. But first, as always, if you guys like the content, don't forget to drop a like, a comment, and a sub. Helps us out and helps keep the website up and up to date. First, we have to go through a little sponsored segment. So this video is sponsored by Skillshare. So we're going to go through that, and then we will jump into the best sniper support weapons. So this video has been sponsored by Skillshare.com. Skillshare is an awesome website. It's all about learning through a community-based, video learning platform. So they have all different kinds of categories. Pretty much anything you could imagine learning about, they have on here. Animation, creative writing, marketing, even into business analytics and entrepreneurship. Productivity, they have UI UX design and web development, which for me is something that's very important. Obviously, I built TrueGameData.com with Christina, and that has launched this YouTube channel and all of my streaming platform and everything. So web development was all self-taught to me. I didn't learn that in school. I was an engineer by trade, so obviously I'm not an expert on the subject. I learned it all myself, so I have tons of holes in my knowledge, and Skillshare has been really helpful in filling in those holes. So right now I'm learning about CSS, modern CSS. I'm taking this class. It's on Skillshare.com, and it's really teaching me about front-end development, which is something that I just have almost no experience in. And I just think learning in general is something super important that everyone should keep doing forever. I don't think you should ever be complacent in your knowledge. And Skillshare in today's day and age is just the perfect kind of platform to do that. It's simple. You have really informative videos that you can watch quickly and learn. So I'm super excited to be working with Skillshare. The first 1,000 people that use my special code in the link below, description and comments, will get a free 1-month trial of Skillshare Premium. So you can use any of the different classes they have across the whole website for 1 month for free. So we're super excited to be working with Skillshare, and thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. So basically, when I'm building a sniper support weapon, I'm always looking for good ADS times, good TTKs, good mobility, pretty much just something that's going to be good in most situations. Probably not the best in any situation, but just something that's really good all around. You're looking for something that can win a lot of fights against SMGs, but also win a lot of fights out 60 meters or so, where you're probably not going to be using that sniper too often. So I'm just going through the list of ARs. Modern Warfare AK is not going to be fast enough. It's just going to be too slow. Mobility. Cold War AK is actually a really good option. AN94s, no way. AS-Val is a great option as well. It has insane TTKs and pretty good mobility, but obviously it's held back by that magazine. So I'm going to include it, but it's really only like a solos and duos weapon. C58's pretty good, but it's just kind of a little bit too slow in my opinion, and especially in closer up fights, it really helps to have faster fire rate. Some of the guns aren't going to have faster fire rate, like the AK and the Milano we're going to include, but I just think there's some better options than the C58, so I'm not going to include it. AMAX used to be a fantastic choice for this before the Cold War guns existed. Now I think it's probably a little bit outdated compared to some of the other Cold War guns, so I'm not going to include the AMAX. FAL is a very good option for this. Again, same as my other video that I put out. It's just, it doesn't quite have the consistency with the recoil because it's a semi-auto gun, so you have to control that recoil based on how fast you shoot, which can be really difficult. So I'm not going to include it. The FARA is a little too slow ADS times. It's good. It's very good. It's just a little bit too slow in my opinion. FFAR is the same story as the FARA. FFAR is great. It has great TTKs still. It's still a really good gun. It's just a little too slow. They nerfed that ADS time a lot on it. SCAR is only going to be like a mid to long range gun just for mobility and ADS reasons. Burst gun's never going to be good for a sniper support because it just doesn't have the TTKs up close. Grau doesn't have the TTKs up close. Groza is actually a pretty solid option right now. Really good mobility. It's bordering on an SMG territory for mobility and just how it plays in general. So I will include the Groza. The Kilo TTKs aren't there. Krig TTKs aren't there. M13 TTKs aren't there. M4 is borderline. But again, we just have some better guns through the Cold War guns than the M4 nowadays, like the XM4, for example. It's just kind of better for this role in every way, so we're not going to include the M4. Odin's too big and chunky and slow. QBZ doesn't have the TTKs. Ram 7, I'm going to include it just because A lot of people love the Ram 7. I think that there's some better options out there, but of all the Modern Warfare guns, I think the AS-Val and the Ram 7 probably the most realistically the best for this role. And then the XM4 is fantastic for this role. It's really good at everything, so we're gonna add that one for sure. Let's add the Groza to this. Then going through the SMGs, AK-74U would be okay. Really, when you're looking for an SMG that you can use as a sniper complement, it needs to have really controllable recoil. You have to be able to hit your shots out there, 15, 20, 30 meters. Because sometimes you're going to get in those fights and there's just no option. You can't really use your sniper in that situation unless you have great cover, and then you can use a head glitch or something. But really, you're looking for really good recoil and just good mobility. Most of the SMGs are going to have good mobility, but AK-74U would be decent, but I think there's some better options, so I'm going to skip it. AUG, I don't know if they've updated the 9mm rounds yet. When they first said they patched the 9mm rounds to have more damage, they didn't, so I don't know if they've changed that yet or not. We need to check that soon. Bullfrog just doesn't have the TTKs at range. It's really good inside 15 meters, and then it's just horrible after that. So Bullfrog is not going to be included. CX9, if we had it, maybe it would be good, but it still hasn't been released. Fennec doesn't have a big enough mag. ISO would be okay. I just think there's some better options through ARs, so we're not going to include it. KSP's still not very good. Better than it was, but still not very good. I don't think it really fits in this role again, just because it doesn't have the TTKs. LC10 is probably one of the better options for an SMG for sniper support, just because it's really accurate. It has the benefits of being an SMG, like good sprint to fire and mobility. MAC-10, same story. Both of these are really, really easy to control, which means they're more effective at range, which is something that you need in an SMG that's going to be your sniper support. So I'm going to include the LC10. I'm not going to include the MAC-10. They're very similar, so when I talk about the LC10, you can kind of pretend like I'm also talking about the MAC-10. The MP5s just don't have the range to be used as a sniper support. MP7 is decent. We can include the MP7. It's one of the few Modern Warfare guns that I think kind of can fit in this role okay. And then the Milano, actually, after the recent buff, the Milano is in a really, really good spot for sniper support, so I'm definitely going to include that one. Nail gun doesn't have the range, bullet velocity. It's ridiculous as an SMG, but it doesn't fit as a sniper support. P90, it's okay. There's just no reason to use it over some of the other guns, so I'm not going to include it. Bison, even after the buff in the most recent patch, the Bison's not really worth using for this role. PPSH looks really attractive on the TTK chart, but in practice, it has way too much recoil for sniper support, in my opinion, so I'm not going to include that. Then Striker 45 is just like a bad AR, so I don't know why. I would never use the Striker AR or the Striker 45 over like a Cold War AK or an XM4. It just doesn't make sense to me. Uzi with the ammo conversion is actually decent, but again, I just think in the current state with the small mag you get with the Uzi, I just think there's some better options, so we're not going to include that. But let's add the MP7 as well. All right, I'm going to start by just comparing the best ARs. And then I'll take the winners from this comparison and move them over to the sheet that's going to have the SMGs on there as well. So we're just going to compare ARs first. So we've got the Cold War AK, XM4, Ram 7, and Groza. The reason I didn't include the AS-Val is because I just think it's too niche of a weapon. Very few people actually like to use it. I think a lot of people have tried because of the good TTKs. But I just don't think it works for that many people, so I'm not going to include it here. So we're just going to start off with... these are the builds I would recommend, but we'll go over all the recommended builds later. But I just wanted to include the builds in the stats here to give the best comparison that we can. So starting with 250 health chest shots, Cold War AK has fantastic TTKs, specifically on chest shots. So it easily wins this by about 50 milliseconds, 60 milliseconds. Next up in chest shots is the Groza and the Ram 7, which are about tied. And this is in the first damage range I'm talking about first. And the XM4 is just a little bit slower than both of those, about 20 milliseconds slower than the Groza and the Ram. But then out at range, which when you're using a sniper support, you will have some fights that you need to use your AR out to, between probably 30 and 50 meters pretty regularly. So out here is going to be important as well. So Cold War AK still wins out there. Then actually XM4 takes over. XM4 is then in second, and then followed by the Ram 7, followed by the Groza. So looking at TTKs on chess, Cold War AK easily is the winner here. There's no comparison. Let's take a quick look at headshots just to get an idea of that. Ram 7 wins by about 50 milliseconds on headshots in the first damage range, but then after the first damage range, the Cold War AK and the XM4 take over. And the XM4 in this last patch got that buff to have the same neck multiplier as headshot multiplier. So basically you have a bigger head hitbox with the XM4 now than you did before. So that's something to keep in mind. You will get more headshots with the XM4. This is something that we haven't fully investigated yet because I just haven't had time. I'd still like to. But currently we don't know what the next shot multipliers are for all the different guns. I haven't even attempted to test it yet. I'm sure there's a way to test it. I just haven't had the time to do it yet. But all we know is the XM4 went from having no neck shot multiplier to having the same as the headshot multiplier now. So it has a bigger head hitbox than it used to. Then out at range, besides the AK and the XM4, the Groza and the Ram 7 are just about 40-50 milliseconds slower, and they're about the same as each other. So not a huge difference. Really, you can't pick a winner here because the Ram 7 wins up close, but then loses at range. XM4 is just consistent across the board. Same with the AK. Let's go to extremities now and look at extremities TTKs. So looking at extremities, both the Ram 7 and the XM4 have that 5.56 damage profile where it's the same damage to the leg, chest, stomach across the board. So they're both going to have good TTKs here. So the Ram 7 will win this over the XM4 by that same 20 milliseconds that it did on chest. So the cyan line is the Ram, followed by the XM4, and then the Cold War AK is orange. And then out at range, the XM4 takes over again. Again, it's about 20 milliseconds faster than the Ram 7 out at range. And the Cold War AK basically matches the Ram. And something I mentioned in my, I don't remember which video it was, one of my AR videos, the Cold War AK has a very forgiving chest shot TTK. And in some cases, like the AMAX, I think the AS Val as well, you literally have to hit every single chest shot to get that chest shot TTK. Whereas with the Cold War AK, I think you can miss up to 2 chest shots and still get that really fast TTK on the chest. So that's something to keep in mind. It has pretty good chest forgiveness compared to a lot of the guns. So you will actually get that good TTK a lot of the time with the AK. So I think if I had to declare a winner here, I'd say Ram 7 and XM4 are basically a tie. XM4 is better at range. Also has better recoil at range, in my opinion. Easier to control. So XM4 definitely would win for me outside about 30 meters. But inside 30 meters, the Ram 7 just has better TTKs. So I would give the win to the Ram 7 inside 30 meters. And then overall winner, I think I'd give the Cold War AK just because it has that chest shot TTK potential that's so much faster than everything else. So overall, I'm going to say AK wins, followed by a tie between the XM4 and the Ram 7, and then followed by the Groza. So Groza loses just because it's not that much worse, but it's a little slower on extremities, and it's just not amazing across the board. All right, so looking at the stats with these builds that I've recommended, one thing to note about the Cold War AK, I don't have the magazines on here because I don't have all the data for that yet. So the Cold War AK has a slow enough fire rate and high enough damage that you can use the 45 round mag, which means that will not hurt your ADS times. So this is the actual ADS time you would get with the final build with the Cold War AK, even though it doesn't include the mag right now. The XM4, however, you have to put either the 45 or the 60. I actually run the 45 a lot. I think 45 is enough for the most part, even with the XM4. So if that's the case, the XM4 would have better ADS times than the AK. But if you have to put the 60 round mag on the XM4, your ADS times are probably going to end up a little bit slower actually than the Cold War AK. So that's something to keep in mind. Ram 7 has really good ADS times at 246. This is a full build including the magazine, just because I have all the data for the Ram 7. And then the Groza. Groza again shoots a little bit faster than the XM4 and does a little bit less damage. So your damage per mag is going to be lower. So I think you probably have to use the 60 most of the time in trios and quads with the Groza. So in that case, this ADS time is probably going to be about 50 milliseconds slower than this. So that's going to make it kind of in between the Cold War AK and the XM4 when they both have 45 round mag, but a little bit faster than the XM4 if the XM4 has the 60 round mag. And then the winner is going to be the Ram 7, unless you use the 45 on the Groza, which I would not recommend. Sprint to fire time, they all have decent sprint to fire times. This is something that's super, super important. I'm going to show a clip of me with the Milano from yesterday, and like one of the situations where sprint to fire time can save you. So that'll be a good explanation there. But all of these have the Raider stock. All the Cold War guns have the KGB Skeletal, Raider, and that's because of sprint to fire times mostly, as well as the mobility up close. So that's something really important, in my opinion, for an all-around gun, because you have to be able to challenge those SMGs. And if you don't have sprint to fire time, you can't challenge an SMG if you're sprinting. Then the Ram 7 is a little slower in terms of sprint to fire time. You have the 5 milliwatt on there to help with sprint to fire, but it's still not quite as good as the Raider stock in terms of sprint to fire. As far as mobility goes, Cold War guns generally always win in mobility. So one of the big things here is this ADS movement speed, and this doesn't even take into account the shooting movement speed of the Raider stock. So these numbers will be even higher when you're shooting on the Cold War guns. So the Ram 7 loses by a ton here, and this is a really important stat. We've learned how important this stat is, and why the Raider stocks are so good, partially, is because of how fast you can move while you're ADS'd. So this is a big loss for the Ram 7, in my opinion, as well as just general movement and sprint speeds are going to be quite a bit slower with the Ram. I do have the Commando on there, which does slow both these numbers down a lot, but to me, in order to make the Ram 7 feel even semi-effective at any sort of range, I had to have the Commando foregrip on there. It helps with that visual recoil and the bounce, and I just think that's almost an essential attachment for the Ram 7 for this slot. If you were using it as like a true SMG, then maybe not, because you'd be so close, but when you need to shoot somebody 50-60 meters away, I think you're going to want the Commando foregrip. Hipfire, by far the Ram 7 is going to win this because it doesn't have the Raider stock, which kills your hipfire, and it also has the 5 milliwatt laser from Modern Warfare, which helps your hipfire a ton. So if you want a hipfire, Ram 7 is going to be way, way better at that. And that's going to make your ADS movement speed not as important up close. So that's a nice benefit to the having good hipfire. Bullet velocity, they're all going to be pretty standard AR bullet velocities between 770 and 830, so doesn't make much difference there. Reload time, I don't have the reload time for the AK on here yet, but the AK easily has the best reload of all of these. Probably followed by, I mean, these three are all pretty similar, I think, the XM4, Ram 7, and Groza, but the AK has a ridiculously fast reload time, so we're going to give the win to the AK there. So if I had to pick two from this list that won, in my opinion, it's Cold War AK and the XM4 easily are the two best. I think there's arguments that can be made for the Ram 7 and the Groza, but I think, my personal opinion, Cold War AK for TTKs, as well as just the rest of the stats, are really good. XM4 has good TTKs, and it's just great everywhere. It has better mobility than the Cold War AK, so that's somewhere it wins. But those are going to be my two picks that we're going to take over to compare to the top SMGs that I talked about earlier. All right, so I keep talking about how important sprint to fire time is in a lot of situations. So this is a clip from me playing earlier tonight when I was trying out the Milano as a sniper support, playing Verdansk, and you'll see that in this case, me and the other guy see each other at the exact same time, and if I don't have a good sprint to fire time that comes default with SMGs, I lose this fight for sure. The only way that might not be true is if my TTKs were so much better with a different gun, like maybe the Cold War AK, where even though I couldn't fire for an extra 150 milliseconds, the TTKs were enough better that I could make up for it. Or maybe you hit headshots or something, but those are edge cases, so I think it's really important overall to have good sprint to fire, especially for up close fights. So I'll show you this example here. Me and this other guy see each other at the same time. We try to shoot at the same time, and because I can get my shots off so quick because of my good SMG sprint to fire, I win the fight barely. So we're pushing up to a gas station here. We know there's a guy there. We know there's a team here. So I pull out the Milano. I had no idea this guy was going to be right here, but because I can shoot so fast and ADS so fast, I win that fight, and my gun's accurate. So all those things combined mean I'm flinching him before he can shoot. Makes it harder for him to hit me. Means I can get my shots off quicker and just kill him faster overall. So I just think sprint to fire time is huge, especially for anything you're going to be using up close, and you're always going to be using your secondary with a sniper if you're up close with somebody. So I think it's very important. All right, so like I talked about earlier, I really only think there's 3 or 4 viable SMGs to be sniper supports. One of them is going to be the MP7. One of them is the Milano. and the LC10. And like I said, the LC10 is very similar to the MAC-10, so just consider that. So I've built these how I run them if I'm using them in these situations. Again, these are my own subjective builds, but I'll explain why I pick what I pick. So we'll start with comparing TTKs here again. So this is 250 health chest shot. Again, Cold War AK is going to dominate this because it has that insane chest multiplier. MP7 is actually in second in the first damage range, but it has a pretty bad drop off right after that, and then it's second to last after that first 14 meters, which is pretty painful, especially as a sniper support. It is very accurate though, so that kind of makes up for that a little bit. And then it's just almost the same. It's slightly slower or slightly faster than the XM4 and the Milano, which are very, very similar actually in chest TTKs. Milano has slightly slower at range and slightly faster in the first damage drop off, which is almost the same distance actually. And then the next up is the LC10, which is only a little bit slower again. It's like 20 milliseconds slower than the XM4 in that first damage drop off. And then out at range, the LC10 is quite a bit slower. Again, though, kind of like the MP7, it's very accurate. If they feel very similar to me in how they play, so similar weapons for sure. So overall, from chest TTKs, I would say Milano as far as SMGs go. I'm just going to talk about the SMGs first, and then we'll compare them to the ARs. But Milano has the best chest TTK of these, even though the MP7 is a little faster. The Milano is so much better at range, and it's very accurate as well. So that makes up for the little bit worse TTK up close. If we hop over to extremities, though, it's going to completely change everything. So now the XM4 and the AK are both going to win. XM4 actually beats all of them. It's quite a bit faster. And that's because that 556 damage profile, again, where that extremities TTK is the same as chest TTK for the XM4. Whereas the SMGs have totally different extremities values. Same with the Cold War AK, also has different extremities values. But just looking at the SMGs, they're all very similar in that first damage drop off. The MP7 has the shortest damage drop off by far. So from 14 out to 22, 23, the LC10 and the Milano are easily going to win. And then out at range, the MP7 and the Milano are about the same on extremities. Pretty slow, almost 900 milliseconds. Again, you're not really going to see that though. You're mostly going to get a combination of the chest and extremities TTKs. That's a feature we want to add to the site. I get asked about it all the time. Is there going to be any way to add different shot locations and mix them together and get numbers like that? And yes, I've always wanted to do that. I know how I would do it. I just haven't had time. So hopefully eventually we'll get that out there, but right now we just don't have it. Out at range, I would say Milano, MP7, I'm going to call this a tie. They're both really accurate. MP7 obviously shoots way faster. But the LC10 is going to be last place because it just has this worst TTK, and all three of them are super accurate. So I can't really give an edge to any of these for accuracy. But the ARs are just going to easily win TTKs everywhere on extremities. For SMGs, just don't have the TTKs that they need for that kind of stuff. But if you do something else, that clip I just showed was a sprint to fire clip where it showed the benefit of having good sprint to fire. So if I include sprint to fire time in this, extremities, it's going to change it up a lot. The ARs, because they have those Raider stocks, are still going to have pretty good sprint to fire times. So even with sprint to fire included on extremities, the SMGs don't really beat the XM4 or the AK, but they get a lot closer. And in that first damage range out to 25 meters or so, they're basically tied. I mean, this is such a small difference that you can't really say that one's going to beat the other one all the time. I mean, that's from the top to the bottom is 40 milliseconds there. But if we go to chest, and we include sprint to fire time on chest shots, all of a sudden the Milano, the MP7, both are basically tied with the Cold War AK. So that's what I'm saying, where sometimes if you have a better TTK, like the Cold War AK, you can make up for having bad sprint to fire time. But a lot of the time, the SMGs just have such good sprint to fire time that even a good TTK can't overcome that. And they do that on purpose. That's one of the ways they balance SMGs with ARs, is they give the ARs good TTKs, but they give the SMGs much better sprint to fire time. So it's really important to look at this, I think, when you're looking at close range fights especially, but sometimes, like in that clip, that was probably 30 meters or so. It was still important there, so it can still be important in those situations. All right, so let's go look at the summary stats of these SMGs. Again, they don't have the LC10 and the Milano do not have the magazines just because they're not on the website yet. So you have to add probably 30 milliseconds or so to the ADS times of those two guns. So about 220 for the Milano and maybe like 250, 245 for the LC10, somewhere in there. That's the very next thing I'm going to test. I'll do that very soon. But compared to the ARs, first of all, ADS times are going to be better on the SMGs. So Milano is going to have quite a bit better ADS times. LC10 is going to have better ADS times. And then on top of that, the sprint to fire times are a little bit better on the SMGs as well. So 80 milliseconds faster on sprint to fire. And I've talked about that enough in this video. I don't think I need to say. I really think that's super important. Obviously, ADS time is super important. You got to be able to ADS and get on your target quickly. Movement speed is huge, especially for up close fights. So Milano has the fastest movement speed in the game, tied with the Mac 10. So Milano is going to win this for sure because we have nothing slowing it down. It's just super fast. The LC10 is a little slower, but we put the bruiser grip on the LC10 to speed it up some, whereas the Milano doesn't even have that. And even without the bruiser grip, the Milano is still faster than the LC10. So that kind of allows you to use a different attachment in that slot. MP7, because it's a Modern Warfare gun and because I put this Commando foregrip on there, again, that's just me. I feel like the MP7 becomes a laser with the Commando foregrip, and there's enough fights that are mid-range when you're using a sniper support weapon that I really, really want that Commando foregrip on there. Same logic I used with the Ram 7. Unfortunately, that really, really kills your movement speed, on top of it already being a Modern Warfare gun and your ADS movement speed. But because this is the MP7 and it has a 5 milliwatt laser, you have extremely good hip fire. Basically tied with the best hip fire in the game. I think the ISOs was slightly smaller, but like such a small amount that you can't really say that it won. But so that's nice because you don't always have the ADS for those close fights, is what I'm trying to say there. Like, even though it's slow in ADS movement speed, because it has such good hip fire, a lot of the time you will be hip firing, so it's okay. Milano and LC10 have pretty good hip fire as well. Milano's is a little bit better than the LC10. And I've had some really, I love hip firing the Milano. I don't know why it feels great, but it really does. Obviously, this kills the ARs in terms of in terms of hip fire. So anytime you need to hip fire, you can do that much better with the SMGs. Damage per mag is something that I wanted to talk about. Some damage per mag, I don't have the exact numbers, but the Milano, we're going to use the 55 round drum, and it has a very slow fire rate and it hits really hard. So it has a huge damage per mag. It's crazy. You can wipe a whole quad easily with one magazine with the Milano. I think the XM4 and the AK are very similar. MP7 shoots really fast. So with that 60 round mag, it's probably gonna not have the best damage per mag. LC10 is probably similar to the MP7 in terms of damage per mag. Bullet velocity, MP7 is going to come out on top here with this build. This is actually a mistake. I need to update this. The agency suppressor for the Milano is supposed to increase bullet velocity. So I need to update that. It'll be the same as the LC10 at 420. So they'll be much slower. But 420 is usable, I'd say, out to 50 meters, especially once you get used to it. Reload times, again, the Cold War AK has the best reload time of all these, but then the rest of them I would say are pretty comparable. Not a whole lot different there. All right, so I feel like going through all the stats, having used all these guns, my personal opinion, easily the three best are the Milano, XM4, and the Cold War AK. So we're going to remove the LC10 and the MP7 and regenerate the summary here and just look at those specifically. Turn off bullet travel, and you can see Cold War AK looks like it wins by a ton, but if you include sprint to fire, then boom, now the Milano's tied with that. Milano has a much bigger damage per mag than both of these, has better mobility, has better hip fire, better sprint to fire times. I think the Milano right now is my favorite sniper support weapon, which is crazy because I've never used SMGs as sniper supports. But the Milano basically feels like an AR to me at this point. It's a little slower fire rate. It has really good TTKs out at range, especially when you include sprint to fire. And this is including open bolt delay. So if you turn off open bolt delay, it gets even faster, like dramatically faster. So out at range, a lot of the time open bolt delay doesn't necessarily matter. So if you do both sprint to fire time and no open bolt delay, obviously that's a very specific situation, but it's still worth thinking about. I think all of a sudden the Milano just looks great across the board. And you get the amazing hip fire, the amazing mobility, and I just think it's the best sniper support right now. It has very little recoil. It's probably easier to control than both the AK and the XM4. It just feels great. But let's jump over to in-game and do the recommended builds, and I'll explain why I pick what I pick. So this is gonna be the same recommended build for both the Cold War AK and the XM4, except the magazine. So going attachment by attachment, Cold War AK has quite a bit of recoil. So I really like that the GRU suppressor helps with that vertical recoil a little bit. Obviously, it's a suppressor, gives you better bullet velocity and better damage range, which I think is great for a sniper support weapon. It's going to slow your ADS down and your aiming stability, but I think it's worth it for the positives. Having the only other option really is the regular suppressor, and the swing and damage range there is huge. I mean, it ends up being probably, I don't know, probably 8 meters or 9 meters of difference in damage range, which is really significant. Especially since as a sniper support weapon, a lot of your fights are going to be, you're going to be trying to have those fights in that damage range. So you don't want people super far away. You don't want people super close. One of these sniper support weapons really excels in that middle damage range. So I really think having the extra damage range in this case is very important. So I like the GRU suppressor over the regular suppressor, even though regular suppressor gives you sprint to fire. I use the Spetsnaz grip just because the AK has quite a bit of recoil, like I said. So with the Spetsnaz grip, that makes it much more effective at range. This helps with both vertical and horizontal recoil. Again, it's going to slow down your movement a little bit, but we have the Raider stock to boost that back up. Speaking of the Raider stock, KGB skeletal stock, that's what it's called for the AK. Gives you that insane firing movement speed and really helps with sprint to fire, which the sprint to fire is the biggest thing I think in this case for why we use that. And then because the AK shoots slow and hits hard, we can just use the 45 round mag, which is nice. Because that way it won't slow down your ADS times like the 60 round mag would. Something you could do, if you don't have an issue with the recoil on this gun, you could drop the Spetsnaz grip and put on like the takedown barrel, which would give you much more damage range, which would be really helpful because, like I said, a lot of your fights are going to be in that middle damage range with this gun. So that's one option, is swap into the takedown barrel, but I always used to run it like this and loved it. I absolutely loved using this as my my sniper support. And like I said, this is the same as the XM4. So let's go build the XM4, the agency suppressor. If you want to extend that damage range, you could use a barrel, but I feel like the accuracy is a little bit more important, being able to hit your shots, flinch your enemy. So I pop that on there, and then in quads, you can probably get away with 45 round mag. I use 45 round mag in rebirth quads and it works fine for me. So I think it's possible, but I think a lot of people probably will still want the 60 round Raider pad for sure. And then I still like Millstop for my sniper support weapon. My sniper support AR, we'll talk about that when I get to the Milano. But this is the build I'd recommend for the XM4. This is a fantastic gun right now too. It's so consistent, super accurate, really easy to use. And then for the Milano's build's a little bit different because it's an SMG. So we use the 55 round drum, which gives us a huge damage per mag potential. It has such good recoil, I don't think it needs an underbarrel. I love hip firing, so I use the 5 milliwatt. And then because it has an open bolt delay, if you have an open bolt delay and mediocre sprint to fire time, I feel like you really need to help that sprint to fire time because both those things stack. So there's a 100 millisecond sprint to fire time, 50 millisecond open bolt delay. Then your time from when you're sprinting to when you can shoot is really 150 milliseconds, even though your sprint to fire time is only 100 milliseconds. So I like to add the wire stock to this. It's just one of those attachments that just helps with sprint to fire time. It doesn't hurt you anywhere. So I really like it. This also keeps your ADS movement speed up a lot because it's just, this gun already has great mobility, so you don't really need to boost that any. It's already going to be better than other ARs and anything else that you'd be using in this slot. And then for some reason on the Milano, I really like the Cobra. I like that extra zoom. It gives you an extra, the numbers say like an extra 0.5x or something like that, but when actually measured, it's like an extra 0.25x or so. And I just love it. I like the Cobra for some reason on the Milano. And I think maybe it's because I don't need to ADS up close as much as I do with the ARs. So I can have more zoom for longer fights, but I don't need to use the close, or I don't need the low zoom for my ADS fights up close like you do with the Cold War ARs because of that Raider stock killing your hip fire. So I think that might be why, I don't know, but I love the Cobra red dot on this build. Is amazing. I loved using this in Rebirth. I loved using it in Verdansk. I think this is the best sniper support that is in the game right now, and I think that's really surprising for me to say. I loved the Cold War AK as a sniper support, but I do think the Milano for me has taken over, just because it's so good everywhere. It's so good up close, and it's so good at range, just because the recoil is so easy to control. All right, everybody. Well, that was a very long and complicated video and detailed video, and I hope you found it useful and informative. As always, thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video and sponsoring the channel. If you guys want to help us out, check out Skillshare. It really is a cool site. They've got a lot of great classes on there to learn. I'm super happy to be working with Skillshare. But as always, I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you guys all in the next video. I'm not sure what it's going to be about, but we'll figure that out, and I will see you then.